James, we were talking yesterday about my trip to Virginia with the family to saw down a Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. Well, last night I had some American friends over for dinner. They were scoffing at me. They said, no actual real American does this. This is something that you think we do. And it got me thinking, what do Americans think us Brits do that we don't actually do? And it turns out you, Mr. Matthews...
Yeah.
Apparently you do actually play bagpipes in your house.
Well, listen, we've got bagpipes on the family playlist, right? Michael, the bureau chief from Northern Ireland, great lad, we like and respect him. But he has an accent, incidentally, that would singe your eyebrows. You know, he's from Carrickfergus, that hard. Says, good morning, you think he's going to murder your children. But he's a good guy. We had him round for dinner. And in this Scottish household... the family playlist, Julie started playing some bagpipe tune, which was great. And I said, oh, Michael, you probably think we play this all the time. This tune, Julie stopped, and then some other pipe band kicked in with Highland Cathedral. So there we are, big laugh, sitting there with this Celtic extravaganza around us, very much expat Scots. Mike Myers, eat your heart out.
I'll bring my haggis next time I come round to your house. I'm Mark Stone.
And I'm James Matthews. We're both in the Trump 100 studio in Washington, D.C.
And on the podcast today, a revealing interview with Donald Trump's right-hand woman that has certainly set the cat among the pigeons.
More boat bombings in the Caribbean as the Secretary of War is asked again, show us the video.
And the president versus the BBC. He is pursuing legal action against Auntie. We'll get into it all.
Now, Susie Wiles, Donald Trump's chief of staff, they call her the ice maiden inside the White House. Apparently quite fitting because she's blown a chill through the place. She's given an interview to Vanity Fair, sat down with the magazine 11 times to discuss all things Trump and Team Trump. She's well placed to divulge the detail because Susie Wiles, well, she's the woman who has the president's ear and his trust. She was campaign manager behind his two winning elections before he made her the first ever female chief of staff in the White House. She is the gatekeeper, every inch in her circle. To hear her perspective, Mark, on her old friend and the company he keeps, it's quite the read, isn't it? It's unflattering in a way that we haven't seen or heard from the heart of Team Trump, and it's coming from someone in the room. And it's rather put the administration in damage control mode.
Yeah, you say, James, that she was interviewed 11 times. I think that's quite important context. It isn't as though she just did one quick TV interview. Yeah. This is a situation where she invited someone, Chris Whipple, who is a well-known journalist here in Washington, incidentally has written a book on all the living chiefs of staff that have frequented the corridors of the White House. So he knows exactly how this role works. He knows exactly the sort of story he wanted to get, and surely so does she. So she sat down 11 times with him, and the consequence is this long read in Vanity Fair, 2-part, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's very candid. It is a candid assessment of the whole team, the whole White House team, in what is surely one of the most consequential White House administrations in living memory. The detail we'll get into, but it's worth stressing how important the role of Chief of Staff is and how important a character she has become in that role. Credited as being the person who's kind of kept the Trump show on the road this past year. A wholly different presidency, as we know from his previous term, from his first term. This time, there has been no revolving door. There's been kind of discipline in the White House. There's been cohesiveness, and that she is credited for, the kind of Trump whisperer who keeps him and his team on the straight and narrow. As for the detail, well, we'll get into it because it's really interesting. J.D. Vance, she said he is a conspiracy theorist, or at least he was for many years. Elon Musk, a ketamine user. Well, we thought we knew that. She's confirming it. A complex character. We kind of knew that. She's confirming it. And she also confirmed the rumor that he would sleep in a sleeping bag in the White House annex offices during his time running Doge. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, well, Susie Wiles says that she whiffed the Epstein files. In other words, she screwed up the release of them, or the lack of release, as is the case at the moment. On Venezuela, he asked about that, of course, and she seemed to confirm that the boat strikes, which we have seen happening over many weeks now, are about pressuring Maduro, Venezuela's leader, to step down. So it appears they are more performative. Incidentally, they are actually killing people rather than stopping the flow of drugs into the United States. Also on Venezuela, she said that if airstrikes on land were to take place, well, that would require congressional approvals. I thought that was very interesting.
Old school.
Old school, yeah, exactly.
Like the way it used to happen.
And on the idea that Trump is only pursuing court cases against his enemies as retribution, she confirmed, or appeared to confirm at least, that that is indeed the case. And she says it was only supposed to go on for 90 days. The quote here is, "We had a loose agreement that the score settling will end before the first 90 days are over." And then on the president himself, James, I thought a really interesting observation. She said that the famous teetotal president has the personality of an alcoholic. He operates as if there is nothing he couldn't do, she says.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Interesting, intriguing because of who's saying it as much as what's being said, I suppose. Susie Wiles, she talked politics as well as personalities, said she'd seen the Epstein files, said that Trump was in them but had done nothing wrong. She said that he and Jeffrey Epstein had only been acting like young single playboys. Now, bearing in mind she gave this interview, relatively recently, I do find that an astonishing characterization, dismissive of Epstein's past as a convicted child sex trafficker and paedophile, don't forget. Susie Wiles, she didn't agree with some decisions that had been made, some of the big ones. Remember, USAID, the International Development Agency, shut down by Elon Musk, the man in the sleeping bag. Thousands lost their jobs. Countries in need of aid were left high and dry. This, remember, was a flagship policy, emblematic of Trump's drain the swamp. Susie Wiles said in this interview she was initially aghast at the scope of the department cuts.
Yeah, but she chose not to do anything about it. I mean, one of the things that they say about the chief of staff at the White House, chief of staff to the president, is that they are pretty much the only person who is able to say to whichever president it is, no, Mr. President, you can't do this, or this is illegal, or you need to go to Congress to do this. She chose not to, although it is clear from her interview that she was deeply uneasy about the cuts to USAID. Watching her interactions with Trump, and I've watched her, we both have, she's always in the shadows, quite often off camera, but when the camera pans around, you see that she is there. She's in the room almost every time. It does feel to me as though Donald Trump respects her. He listens to her. And he values her judgment. But I kind of get the sense from this interview that even if she disagrees with stuff that he is doing, she sees herself as Trump's enabler, as kind of the disciplinarian of the West Wing MAGA tribe, but not there to stop him if she feels that he's doing something that might not be such a good idea.
She's a woman with a keen survival instinct inside the Trump administration. And you're right about chiefs of staff, having that check and the balance on a president telling him where to get off. We've not seen that with Susie Wiles. We did see that in the past with the likes of John Kelly, and accordingly they had a short shelf life. And that's the difference all round, not just with Susie Wiles, but there were people who held a tight rein on Trump in the past. This time, no such individual exists.
I think what's interesting, James, is the extent to which the White House is pushing back on this interview. They are clearly deeply upset with what they are describing as a hit piece. I mean, for me, it wasn't exactly flattering, and actually the photographs that accompany it certainly are not flattering. Do you see them?
It's like the nasal hair world championships, isn't it? These extreme close-ups that nobody wants.
Yeah, exactly. They are certainly not flattering, but the White House is unhappy with the way that the narrative by Chris Whipple has been shaped. Susie Wiles took to Twitter herself, took to X, saying that it was a disingenuously framed hit piece on the finest president, White House staff and cabinet in history. Significant context was disregarded, says Wiles. Much of what she and others said about the president and his team were left out of the story. So it appears to be the case that not only did Whipple interview Wiles, but he interviewed a lot of other people as well. And then he has kind of shaped his story, taken a lot of what she said, not very much of what other people said, and the White House does not like it. But he did record everything.
Exactly, yeah. Despite what Susie Wiles is saying, Vanity Fair has come out with audio recordings of these interviews, given them to the New York Times, which confirm the quotes. The president's team, many of whom Wiles eviscerated in this two-part long read, well, they have quickly closed ranks. We've seen them coming out publicly. J.D. Vance, he spoke in Pennsylvania, the vice president. He said that Susie Wiles was the best chief of staff the president could wish for. He also addressed the fact that he'd been called by Wiles a conspiracy theorist.
Sometimes I am a conspiracy theorist, but I only believe in the conspiracy theories that are true. And by the way, Susie and I have joked in private and in public about that for a long time. For example, I believed in the crazy conspiracy theory back in 2020 that it was stupid to mask 3-year-olds at the height of the COVID pandemic, that we should actually let them develop some language skills. You know, I believed in this crazy conspiracy theory that the media and the government were covering up the fact that Joe Biden was clearly unable to do the job. And Susie Wiles, we have our disagreements. We agree on much more than we disagree, but I've never seen her be disloyal to the President of the United States, and that makes her the best White House chief of staff that I think the President could ask for.
The President has reacted to Susie Wiles' remarks. For now, she has the manager's vote of confidence. He said he wasn't offended by Wiles' comments, even admitting to the New York Post that he does have an alcoholic's personality, citing his possessive personality as the reason why he's never been a drinker.
Imagine what those Truth Social posts would be like if he'd had a whiskey or two.
For me, Mark, the reaction we've had from inside the administration has been telling. They've been queuing up very publicly to come out, rubbish the article, support the president, when the response might have been to let it go, keep the head down, assume that posture that says nothing to see here. That would be characteristic of the crisis management they usually deploy. I think they're reacting differently this time because, well, of who's involved. It's different and it matters more. This is a critique from a trusted lieutenant, which they know will feed the suggestion of a lame duck presidency, and a president whose support base is weakening. Those in the MAGA movement are unhappy. There are many of them unhappy at the Epstein affair, the focus, as they see it, too much on foreign affairs, etc. None of that goes away with these comments from Susie Wiles. The danger for Trump is that it actually gets compounded and it fuels suggestions of this lame duck president, increasingly vulnerable and weakened. If we assume that Susie Wiles didn't stumble naively into this interview, and remember, we're talking about a seasoned political operator, then I think we're being offered a withering critique of life inside the White House that presents this creeping sense of those around Trump becoming aware, being aware, acknowledging this is a man with a limited political future who risks shortening theirs.
It does increasingly feel, doesn't it, like we're sort of creeping into the post-Trump world where the whispers and the gazes are now beyond the Donald.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, she talks about both of them as being two natural successors to Donald Trump. She doesn't say it in those terms, but it's very clear that they are seen by her and by others as Trump's potential successors. Both, remember, big Trump critics at one point, now turned supporters. And she has some interesting language around that. She says that J.D. Vance's conversion appeared to the MAGA crowd and to Trump appears to be political and calculated. Marco Rubio, though, she said that took time. The inference seemed to be that Rubio is more ideological and principled than J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the big stories of next year for sure. The midterms next November, that will be the big measure of where Trump stands, where he has taken the Republican movement. Right now, it's not great for him. A new Reuters Ipsos polls out today shows his approval at 39%, almost at its lowest of this term. It was 47 when he returned to power in January. Those kind of figures can only extend the fracture lines further towards Donald Trump.
Now, James, Venezuela, we mentioned it already. Susie Wiles' comments on that appearing to suggest that the only reason they're doing it is because they want to put pressure on the Venezuelan leader. Well, that was very candid of her. But the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, they are both still claiming that this is all about disrupting the drug flow into the United States. It could, of course, be two things. Two things could be true. It may well be disrupting the drug flow into the United States. It is also possibly putting quite a lot of pressure on Maduro. But they were both on Capitol Hill today, weren't they, defending their policy?
They were indeed, yeah. But I suppose there you have it, Mark. The question would be, who do you believe, Donald Trump or Susie Wiles? She's contradicting the administration's official stance, and that's a tough shout. Do you side with Trump, who says it's all about drugs, or do you side with Susie Wiles, who appears to have let the cat out of the bag? She is contradicting the administration's official stance that this is a war on drugs. All the while, of course, the pressure mounts, as you say, on Pete Hegseth, calls continuing for him to release the video of the second strike that was ordered on the first vessel struck back in September. The Washington Post, it's reported a couple of weeks ago that the boat was totally incapacitated by the first strike, and there were 2 injured survivors. There was a second strike following Hegseth's order to kill everybody on board. Now, Hegseth denies giving that order. He was on Capitol Hill today with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and together they were addressing members of Congress.
Yes, and he was asked whether he'd be releasing the footage of the second bombing of the boat.
We're also going to tomorrow allow the HASC and SASC to see the unedited video of the September 2nd, alongside with Admiral Bradley, who has done a fantastic job, has made all the right calls, and we're glad he'll be there to do it. But in keeping with long-standing Department of War policy, Department of Defense policy, of course we're not going to release a top-secret, full, unedited video of that to the general public. HASC and SASC and appropriate committees will see it, but not the general.
An issue for the politicos. I had an interesting conversation, Mark, with an experienced military man this week, decades of service, officer class, very frustrated at what's been going on off Venezuela. He's no fan of Pete Hegseth, but he's even less enthusiastic about the American military presence where it is. He made the point that this is putting members of the US military in harm's way on a scale that doesn't reflect the threat, if indeed drugs are the threat. His view is that for the military, this is very bad for morale. And
let's remember that fentanyl, which is the street drug that Donald Trump says is the reason he's doing this, well, none of that comes from Venezuela.
Now, Mark, on Monday at a presidential medal ceremony recognizing officers securing America's borders, we had an unexpected announcement from the president. He put the BBC back in his sights.
In a little while, you'll be seeing I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth, literally. They put words in my mouth. They had me saying things that I never said coming out. I guess they used AI or something. So we'll be bringing that lawsuit. A lot of people are asking, when are you bringing that lawsuit? Even the media can't believe that one. They actually put terrible words in my mouth having to do with January 6th that I didn't say. And the beautiful words that I said, right? The beautiful words, talking about patriotism and all of the good things that I said, they didn't say that, but they put terrible words. They actually have me speaking with words that I never said, and they got caught because I believe somebody at BBC said, this is so bad, it has to be reported. That's called fake news. So we'll be filing that suit probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and a few hours later, the court case was filed. 2 counts requesting damages of at least $5 billion for each count from the BBC after the broadcaster edited the president's January the 6th speech just before the riots on the Capitol.
Yeah, President Trump, he questioned whether the BBC had used AI, which is not the case. I mean, it was an inappropriate edit that they made and have since apologised for. They never digitally altered anything, as the president suggested. They spliced 2 sections of his speech more than 50 minutes apart and made it appear that Trump had called for violent action. The BBC Panorama documentary, it focused on Trump's actions and what he said just before the crowds attempted an insurrection. The president was subsequently impeached with allegations that he had incited an insurrection, but he was cleared of wrongdoing by the Senate.
Yeah, so $10 billion worth of damages demanded by the president. That's $5 billion for defamation and $5 billion for violating, the president says, Florida's trade practice laws. Remember, the Panorama error caused the Director General of the BBC to resign and his head of news, Deborah Turness, as well. Tim Davie and Deborah Turness, both their heads rolled, but that was not enough, or is not enough, for Donald Trump. The corporation appears to be standing firm. They say their position remains the same. The BBC strongly disagrees that there is a basis for a defamation case.
Yeah, nonetheless, $10 billion. It's an eye-watering sum for an organisation, the BBC Group, that brought in just short of £6 billion in the last financial year. That's around $8 billion. Any damages paid to the president would be clearly a severe blow for the Beeb. I mean, it's going to be expensive enough defending this action. It should be said it's not by any stretch a slam dunk in court for Donald Trump. The BBC's arguments so far, fleshed out in a response from their lawyers last November, they made a number of points, principally this question about the jurisdiction of a Florida court, given that the programme in question, it wasn't made available for distribution in the United States. They also question the extent to which Trump was actually damaged, given the healthy poll figures that he subsequently enjoyed at the election.
They're going to have to find a Floridian who turned on his VPN, his virtual private network, accessed Panorama, and then watched it, was aghast at what they heard President Trump saying,
Supergrass,
and then changed their view of him as a result. I think it's a bit of a push, but Trump doesn't mind. Trump's just putting pressure on people, isn't he? He's just throwing his weight around.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the timing is no coincidence. As we well know, we have the release of the Epstein files hanging over us all.
Yeah.
Friday is the deadline for that, and I do wonder to what extent that out of the blue, the BBC business came back into the public domain. To what extent is he leaning on the rest of the media to intimidate them in terms of what they will publish about the release of these files?
I do wonder too how the UK government deals with all this. Trump going after the public broadcaster for a lot of money. It puts the UK government, I think, in kind of a few awkward positions. Should they defend the BBC as a publicly funded broadcaster? Hands off the BBC, Mr. Trump. If they do, they could risk upsetting Trump, and that could be a little awkward for diplomatic relations. Yesterday, remember, we were talking about the trade agreements between the US and the UK being somewhat on the rocks. So it's kind of an awkward one for the British government as well. Let's see how that one pans out.
Could be another state visit for Donald Trump. Give the exclusive rights to Sky.
Now, just before we go, some important numbers out over the course of the past 12 hours, and they are not good if you are sitting in the White House. The job figures out on Tuesday morning, and I think they confirm what many already believed, that the economy isn't doing too well, and that President Trump kind of has his head in the sand.
Yeah, not great for Trump at all. The US labour market lost 41,000 jobs in October and November of this year. Unemployment rose up to 4.6%. That's the highest level of unemployment that we've seen here since COVID days.
Yeah, we talked about Susie Wiles at the beginning of the pod. I remember seeing stuff that she said a little while ago where we were being told that Donald Trump was being pushed to focus on the economy. At the beginning of every speech, or every time he appeared on camera about a month or two ago, he would kind of rattle off a few economic figures to try and persuade people that the economy is doing very well. But he's not been very convincing on it at all. He was dispatched up to Pennsylvania last week where he was supposed to do an economy speech. In the end, it wasn't really an economy speech. In fact, he's called this whole affordability thing a Democrat hoax when really it isn't. And the figures now appear to prove that. And so it was the vice president this Tuesday who was dispatched to the provinces to do a better job than the principal, the president, did.
We needed an economic comeback in the United States of America. We needed it. When we talk about all the wage growth, when we talk about all the people who are coming into the United States to invest in the American worker, we've got real money, real jobs, and real opportunity. What that means for the state of Pennsylvania is that in just the last 11 months, we're creating 60,000 good-paying jobs for Pennsylvania families, and we're bringing in, just in this one Commonwealth, $100 billion of new investment into this great place. That is real opportunity for the American people. That is real wage growth for the American people.
So there we go, as ever, the vice president managing to speak to real people in a rather more empathetic way than the president manages.
Yeah, J.D. Vance telling the punters, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I wasn't the gaffer on that job. A man with his eye on 2028. The big question for the man in office right now will be whether he can convince the American public that the country is actually on the right track, particularly when you have the statistics trumping the slogans. Ordinary people still feeling the pinch. The president, he's got a big end-of-year speech on Wednesday evening. We'll be across that, and we'll be back on Friday to reflect on what the president has had to say. And, of course, much more Friday the day, or the deadline for the release of these Epstein files, of course.
Yeah, big day, big day. Bagpipes for you, James.
Yeah, who knows? Could be a lament for Donald Trump, the man, well, with the Scottish roots, crying into his non-alcoholic Scotch whisky. We'll see. Do join us on Friday. See you then.